We got a little pop-up this time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to continue.
Yeah.
Yep. hit continue.
Not
That's your acknowledgement you accept.
Not
All
leave.
right, and we are live, so good evening to our guests who are joining us. It's nice to have you joining us. We're going to be starting with operations in just a moment. Just waiting for people to log on. All right, and it looks as though the number has sort of stabilized there, Mr. Gatanis, so I will turn the meeting over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Welcome everybody to the June Operations Committee meeting. Pursuant to Board Policy 1B5, all meetings of the Salisbury Township School District are audio and video recorded. The district disclaims any and all liability arising from the recording of the meetings and for any statements made by those in attendance. Okay, that takes us to roll call. Mr. Taylor, can I have one, please?
Absolutely. Mr. DeFrank,
Here.
Ms. Frick,
Here.
Mr. Gatanis,
Here.
Ms. Glenister,
Here.
Mr. Ganal,
Here.
Mr. Hattinger,
Here,
Ms. Klinger,
Here.
Ms. Nemitz,
Here.
Mrs. Ziegler,
Here.
and we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that takes us to our final budget for the year 21-22, Mr. Taylor.
All right. Let's take a moment while I share the screen.
And while you're doing that, I will share with the public if there's anyone who would like to comment during the operations meeting. It's section 2-6, citizens comments. Feel free to add your name and address into the chat box.
All right. All right, so as we get started, the timeline for the budget's obviously very small now. We're down to the last item. In 2 weeks on June 16th at the regular board meeting for the month of June, we'll be adopting the final budget. Just some updates on the governor's budget. As we've been talking, he had that big proposal earlier in the year that would give the district a significant increase in funding. There's really been no public movement or agreement yet that is cited one way or the other. What we do know is that the House and Senate are adjourned and will return on June 7th. There is some discussion recently of potentially them passing a 2-year budget, which would be a little unprecedented, but that is something that's being discussed. The increased funding for education is still in discussions, but to what level that'll be, no one knows until they come to an agreement. Charter school funding reform is still an uncertainty, but I've seen some articles recently that Governor Wolf is still proposing charter school reform. So we'll see what actually finally makes it in the budget or whether it's separate legislation. It is likely that the budget will be approved in late June. So at this point, the district is not budgeting any increased funding from the governor's budget. The only increased budgeting for the state funding is associated with the percentage-based reimbursements. For example, the PSERS and FICA reimbursements that we get based off of percentage of our salaries. So we adjusted those in the budget to account for the budgeted salaries. Expenditure changes from the current year to next year. Salaries and benefits is a total increase of 6.1% or 1.5 million. And that makes up increases in health insurance of 10%, PSERS increasing to 34.94%, and bringing emotional support in-house rather than the IU. We have a few additional staff members that will be budgeted for in regards to that. Purchase professional services are increasing 4.2% for 146,000. Purchase property services increase of 6.2% for 62,000. And then other purchase services, 4.5% for $279,000. And then supplies, a 0.7% increase, which equates to $7,296. Changes in revenues are local sources. Budgeted increases of 1.1%, $341,152. State sources, the increase is 3.5%, $270,000. And that's primarily, like I said, the increase in the PSERS reimbursement and FICA reimbursements. And then federal sources, the increase is 87%, which is a little deceiving. The increase is 447,000. But as you see below, $472,000 increase from ESSER 2 funding that we allocated in the budget. So that's why there's such a significant increase in the percentage. And then the reduction in the access funding for next year budgeted of $25,000. And then other sources increase is 691,000, which is the budgeted amount we have for the sale of the fixed assets this summer. So those are the changes from year to year in expenditures and revenue in the budget. The proposed final budget, here's the final details. The millage rate for the current year is 20.5106. The Act 1 index allows the increase of 0.6153, meaning that for 21-22, the tax millage rate would be 21.1259. That equates to a tax on the median residential assessed property of $3,726.61, which is an increase of $108.54. And the final budgeted expenditures and revenues match at $39,946,392. And this is just showing the differences, once again, that we've seen throughout the budgeting process. If there was no tax increase, be a gap of 1.5 million. And then the Act 1 index, before we put in the CARES funding, showed the gap of 472,000. And then we were balanced with the CARES funding, the CARES ESSER funds. And that is the budget presentation. Is there any questions from the board?
Mike, can you go back to that slide that that indicates what the state, what we're waiting on from the state? It's one of the early slides.
The governor's budget?
Yes. So in other words, you're saying that they haven't been able to come up with a one-year budget, but now they're talking about doing two, number one, and number two, those last three line items, increased funding for education, still in discussions, charter school funding reform, and well, actually those two, they obviously they have to get those items resolved to come up with this year's budget. So they intend on getting all of these done, and the expectation is that in late June.
Well, and that's where the charter school funding reform is an uncertainty. It's something that's it's in discussions, but the legislative advocates from PASBO, the updates they're providing is it's uncertain whether they will have the funding reform for the cyber charters, right? So it's still in discussions, but there's no agreements on it yet. There is movement and prospects of increasing educational funding, but they're not saying that it would be to the level that the governor proposed, because that would require an income tax increase, and they haven't come to an agreement on that. So there's still expectations that there'll be some increase in education funding. To what level, don't know. And like I said, for the charter school funding reform, there may be some charter school reform, but will the funding be reformed, particularly with the cyber charters, where they have a state rate that's significantly lower now than what we have now? That's an uncertainty at this point in time. So they'll either have it or they won't in the final budget, which should be approved in a couple of weeks by the end of June.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I don't know if you, and I apologize, I don't know how close you have these numbers embedded in your brain, but can you explain to the public ballpark the percentage of local taxes, the percentage of state, and this percentage of federal, on approximately how much of it makes up our budget for each of those three entities?
Yeah, so 2/3 of our revenues is local revenues, which would be primarily your real estate taxes, but then also your earned local income taxes, your business privilege taxes, the per capita tax, and then some other small funding, for fees that we collect for different things, whether it's rentals or admission to events, which we haven't had this last year. But yeah, 2/3 of it is primarily the property tax. And then the federal revenue is quite small. I mean, this year it's larger with the ESSER funding that we are allocating in the budget, but there's only about $1 million of the overall budget of the 39 million. And then the state funding makes up the difference. So the state funding is about 30%.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from Mike? Okay. Okay, thank you, Mike.
Not a problem.
Okay, that takes us to 2.2 all-school deal. Mr. Ganal, can you explain what's happening with that, please?
Yeah, at a very high level, Mr. Catanis George, myself, Mike Taylor, and Monica Deeb have been in some conversations and exploring some options as far as coming up with a contract with a select vendor to provide more of our sporting equipment. We're talking uniforms, practice uniforms, things of that nature, to get better pricing, for lack of a better term, and also benefit from some of the rebates and services that they offer, so that we can get more equipment at a better price in the hands of all of our students at Salisbury. We've been exploring several different options. We're real at a high level right now. I should be able to come back to the board by the next board meeting with a little bit narrowed down a little bit more to give you a better idea of what who we're thinking about going with, and make some recommendations at that point in time. Mike, I don't know, Monica's not on with us right now, but Mike, I don't know if you want to share anything else, any other details that you think be relevant at this point in time, just because we're still in the early phases of it, but just wanted to make you guys all aware of that we're exploring options to basically maximize opportunity, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, just to add to that, some districts, and in the past it was primarily colleges that would enter into these deals, but there's some benefits to getting guaranteed discounts off of retail prices for the stuff we buy, getting rebates, and some incentives to help us be able to provide more for our students while not necessarily increasing the budget for the district. Monica Deeb has been great help, researching these deals over the last number of months. And we ruled out some ones that wouldn't be very good for the district, but we're considering a couple of proposals right now that any of them would be a tremendous benefit for the district. And we're just trying to maximize their value and present to the board the best opportunity for the district to move forward. So we definitely appreciate the board support and George and Joe's help with this process.
Mike, if I'm reading it right, this is budget neutral, but enhancement to the program. We get more bang for our buck.
Correct. So,
Correct, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
not a problem. What we'd be doing is we'd be saying we'd go through one vendor, but they're locking in guaranteed discounts that we don't necessarily automatically get now from any of these vendors. So it would save us money on the things we buy currently, and then we'll get rebates on stuff that we purchase to further enhance what we get. So yeah, it doesn't increase the cost. It's going to only save us money and get some additional money back.
Sounds all good.
Thank you.
Dave, I
Okay.
think you're on mute. Dave, you're still on mute.
There you go. Is it, Joe, is there an average of how many year deal you generally do with something like this, or?
I mean, the average, it's all over the place depending on what organization you're with or what level you're at. So to say, is there an average? It's probably not the best thing. It's probably to say what is the best opportunity for us as far as what's the best timing. And we're not looking for like extendedly long term, like 20 years, but we're looking at in the 3, 4, 5 year range, so that we can. You have to make sure that it's beneficial, not only just to us, but from the vendor side of things. They want to know that they have for a certain amount of time, they have a portion of business where they can count on like a secure customer, for lack of a better term. And that's just, that's commonplace, but the time frame that we're looking at is that like 4 or 5 year range.
Okay.
And that would, and then we'll see how it goes, for lack of a better term.
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. Any other questions for Joe or Mike? Okay, seeing none. Thank you for your expertise there, Joe. Thanks for helping out with that. Okay, that takes us to the ESSER funds 2.3. Is Michael Taylor or Lynn going first with that?
So I will start, and I'm going to go ahead and screen share here. And we want to provide the board and the public with an update related to ESSER funds. And these are some of the grant funding opportunities that we've received for the COVID grant funding. So first, if you recall, we had the ESSER 2 update, and we've previously shared this, that we have written that grant. Chris Smith, our coordinator of technology, and Kelly Pauling, our director of teaching and learning, collaborated and submitted this grant for the technology refresh. So the MacBook Airs, the iPads, Mac Minis, and the related warranties. So that grant has been submitted, and we're looking at processing all of that. Equipment has been ordered. Some of it has already arrived, and the tech department is working diligently to make that refresh a reality. So thank you to them for that work. You've also heard us share multiple times ESSER 3, or the ARP grant funds. This grant application opened on May 24th, so it is available to us now. Our district allocation is $3.4 million, and we are required to reserve 20% of that allocation for learning loss. Learning loss and learning gaps, missed opportunities and experiences. We need to identify why we believe the learning gaps exist, and we're looking at a variety of data sources to help us with that. It's also important to remember these are one-time funds, and the funds must be expended between March 13th and September 30th of 2024. So we have a little bit of time to expend those. I wanted to share with you the allowable uses, and this is from the American Rescue Plan, and it gives you a lot of information about the grant, and some of the information that we had to consult to make some recommendations about how to use the money. But here are some of the allowable uses on the next two slides. So supplies for sanitizing and cleaning, improving facilities, improving indoor air quality, addressing the needs of low-income families or children with disabilities, ELLs, a variety of other items there, training and professional development for sanitizing and minimizing the spread of infectious disease. There's a second page here. These are all eligible expenses, planning for or implementing activities during our long-term closures, purchasing educational technology, providing mental health services and supports, planning and implementing activities for summer learning and after-school programs, addressing learning loss, and other activities that are necessary to maintain operation of and continuity of services, including continuing to employ existing or hiring new LEA and school staff. So we are required to set aside that 20%, approximately, just over $700,000. And you've heard us talk about the potential for ELA series for elementary learners. You've heard us talk about some summer programming opportunities, also looking at some after school opportunities for next year, and also summer programming for next summer. So we're looking at a variety of strategies to assist our learners. And in addition to those summer and after school programs, supplies and materials to strengthen core programs. So we mentioned reading and ELA already, looking at some math materials. We're going to be hearing about science standards that are coming soon. So we'll be looking to maximize those dollars to really provide opportunities for our learners and purchase core materials to improve our core program. So Mike's going to share a little bit more about our plan for the other 80% of those funds.
So we looked into HVAC and what we can do with the systems to potentially help with, purification systems for, to add onto the current systems or replace some of our aging systems, and see, could we use the funds for that, as that's one of the possible uses. And that's been something that's been suggested. So we met and had some discussions, and speaking with Bill Brackett, our director of facilities, we looked at the different buildings. And if you look at SES, the existing system is approximately 5 years old. There really isn't any major things done. You could potentially put on some ionization filters, but the challenges with that is how long it would take to get the systems in. And, it could be well into next year before you'd even get a system. And hopefully the worst of the pandemic is behind us by that point in time. So we're not sure that that's the best spending of the money there. If you look at the middle school, I think people are aware of the concerns at the middle school. The system is approximately 16 years old. And that is part of the reason we need to do some major renovations at the middle school. And Dewey, who is the district's engineers, had said for the HVAC project alone that they would have a project cost about 20 million. And that's to do the HVAC, get rid of the univents in there, running ductwork throughout the building, which would then require us to put in drop ceilings, new lighting. It'd be a $20 million project. So the 2.8 million after the learning loss would really not even put much of a dent into that. And if we just did the HVAC and you did renovations down the road, you might not be able to utilize everything you've done with the HVAC. And then with the high school, the system's about 10 years old. Once again, it's in good shape. There's not really much that needs to be done. And then once again, if we were to do some of the ionization filters or something like that, the problem with the supply chain and timing to get it all done could be problematic. So we really looked we looked at a high level into the HVAC issues and really determined that probably won't be the best spend of the district's funds of the ESSER money. So if we want to go to the next slide. So what the district is planning at this point is salaries and benefits for staff members for the current school year, the 2021 school year, who support special education and the ESL learners. So we've already spent the money, but we can submit for reimbursement. And that's really how this grant would work anyways, is you have to spend the money first, which is another challenge with doing some of these other bigger projects. You spend the money, you submit for reimbursement, and then they'll send you the funds. So the total anticipated reimbursement request after the learning loss would be $2.786 million. And between our special education support and our ESL learners support teachers, we can get reimbursed for salaries of 1.6 million, FICA of 128,000, PSERS 579,000, and then other benefits, including healthcare of 310,000. So if we use the ESSER funds for reimbursement in the current year, we can submit that, get reimbursed approximately $2.7 million in the next few months, which would put the cash flow in the district a lot quicker than planning projects for next year and then spending the money and then get reimbursed then, which would definitely help if we have some, additional expenses that we're not, currently planning, if anything else pops up as we transition back to, fully being back in school. So if we go with this plan and after addressing the 20% with learning loss, that would leave approximately $88,000 for other COVID-related expenses that could come up. And the advantages, once again, of this plan would be is it's reimbursement of the funds and we get the funds in the district much quicker and offsetting some of the additional expenses that we had this year in 2021. So right now we're looking to see if the board has any questions or wants to discuss the plan for the ESSER funds.
My question, and it's just a question, what's the probability? Have other districts done this? Is this built upon guidance you received or of being successful? That's why I was with the probability of being successful on this request.
So I reached out to some other business managers on a recent call, and nobody spoke up that they were doing it for this year. A lot of people are using these funds to balance budgets for next year or to offset some of the costs next year. They figured that if they got through this year, they didn't need the money right now, and it's more about balancing budgets. Whereas we're looking for more, immediate cash flow. But I believe some are planning on using it for salaries and benefits next year. But we did reach out to the federal programs coordinator and said, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. Is this an allowable expense? And they responded affirmative that we could do so.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board regarding the plan?
Right now, no.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mike and Len. Okay, that takes us to 2.4, elementary community bus stop discussion. Mr. Taylor.
Okay, thank you. This will be just a real brief overview and really more looking for guidance from the board. Last year, when we were going through the public hearings and the discussion of closing Western, the idea or thought had come up of potentially having an express bus, basically bus students directly from Western over to SES now on the east side of town. And it recently has been brought up again, hey, is that a possibility for next year? You know, especially with the anticipation that we're gonna have more students returning to in-person learning. As administration, we've looked into the logistics and the feasibility of it. And there's a lot of concerns just financially and logistically how we would handle that. And it could create quite a bit of problems. So at this point, we don't think that's the best solution going forward, but we still want to be able to try to find a way to help those parents that have that concern and those challenges. So working with Mark Donnelly, our Director of Transportation, we've come up with an idea that we want to pass by the board and see if you want us to pursue looking into that option a little bit further. We currently have 4 bus routes on the western side of town for elementary students that come over to the east side. We could potentially, depending on demand and need, have 1 or more of these bus routes swing by, you know, on their way over to the eastern side of town in front of the elementary school and set up a bus stop. That would be like the last stop of that route. And we could have families opt into having that be their bus stop rather than their current stop. Therefore, they wouldn't have to ride that whole long distance. The parents could, you know, they'd be responsible for getting the students to that bus stop and then picking them up at the end of the day. But it would be the last pickup stop and then go directly over to the elementary school on the eastern side of town. And then the evening at the end of the day, it would be the first stop dropping off. So it would just give the families an opportunity, instead of having to drive them themselves and drop them off at the eastern side of town, of being able to have like a community bus stop, you know, right there on Devonshire, you know, where the address is. And then the other thing we thought about is if there's a number of students, we don't want to put it in a place that would be problematic for neighbors or residents. So right there in front of the elementary school, middle school, and then there's the apartment complexes. It shouldn't be overcrowded, hopefully. But if the board is interested in us pursuing something like this, we can send out a survey this month, gauge the interest, see how many people would be interested in it. And then depending on the level of interest, we may need to use 2, 3, or 4 of these runs, or just reroute the runs to make it, you know, able to accommodate this potential request. The benefits of doing it this way compared to doing an express bus is, if we do an express bus, we'd have to add another route, which could potentially cost about $20,000 to the district annually. If we do an express bus, we would have to worry about potentially supervision over there at the elementary school. If we're setting up as an express bus, we'd have to look into potentially extending the crossing guard. There's a lot of, you know, increased costs that potentially would happen. And then the revenue issue, the revenue that we get reimbursed for the state for transportation is based off of a number of different factors, but one of it's loaded miles. And if it's just one route running 5.3 miles the other side of town, we'd have very limited revenue support to help offset the cost. Whereas if we're adding a stop to our current runs, we're not adding a run, so we're not adding any cost. And if some families were to put them on these routes rather than drive themselves, or if we had students come back from charter school, we'd have more students on the bus, which would potentially increase our subsidies. And then, you know, if we're not paying charter school, that would obviously save us some money as well. So doing an option like this wouldn't generate additional expenses, but could potentially generate additional revenue or offset some of the costs. So it's just an alternative solution that we've come up with to look into. So I can answer any questions the board has, or if you guys want to give any guidance or suggestions, that's what we're looking for tonight if you want us to pursue this option.
You go ahead, Sarah. Go
Good
ahead.
question. You said you were going to survey parents. Are you going to propose this as an idea of they opt in and they like, this is their bus stop, they have to do this every single day? Or is it something that parents could use like as a convenience? Like right now, I only pick up my daughter at Salisbury Elementary one afternoon a week, and that's the afternoon that she has dance. So would she be able to use this express bus on that afternoon and just come to our house the other days? Or is this like an all in, all out, or is it an opt in, opt out?
So the more flexible we make it like that, the more challenging it could potentially be, just
Sure.
because where they're coming from the west side, if they're on this community bus stop on one day, they may be on one bus, but they might be on a different bus to go home. So it might be challenging to have enough capacity on the buses. So preferably, we were thinking that it would be opt-in and that's your bus stop. Now, obviously, there's one-offs. I mean, there's students that have a traditional stop and might go home to grandma one day, right? And,
Yeah.
and as long as there's enough space, it's fine. The only concern is if we have 50 people interested in this bus and then if there's a lot of fluctuation, that can be challenging. If we're talking 5 or 10 students, we can maybe be more flexible. So really does the board want us to consider something looking into this? And then we can do the survey and see what the interest is. And then we can give you more definite of how it work and can we be more flexible like that? Like I said, it really depends on the interest.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's worth looking into. I would just be clear on like the expectation, like from this point to be sure that you get the information that you need.
Yeah, we'll definitely say in the survey that, hey, we would anticipate that this would be your stop and your own stop, year round, and that it's not optional day to day. But like I said, if it comes back, there's 4 kids that are interested and they need a little bit of flexibility, we can maybe work with that. But like I said, the larger the numbers, just the more challenging it could potentially be. The other option could be we have all 4 buses, go through there and have that be the last stop. And then you're not really moving kids to different buses. But like I said, it really depends on the demand that we have for it. Would be how we would, 1, plan the routes, and then 2, would also dictate how much flexibility we could have at that point.
Yeah, I also wonder like how it would affect the routes. Like, do they all sort of drive down that way on their way over to the east side of the township, or?
Mike, before you answer that though,
Sorry.
can you clarify exactly where you're thinking about the stop being at? Because when I heard you say the elementary school, where were you referring to as far as where you, and I understand this is all theoretical at this point in time. So where theoretically, specifically, do you see the stop being at? Because when you said it originally, you said the elementary school, and I was like, well, we know where it's going. I didn't realize where were you thinking about actually picking them all up at?
Sure. So we're visiting this as a bus stop more than a bus depot, right? So we don't intend pulling into the elementary school and sitting there waiting for students. It'd be the last stop, the scheduled time, just like any bus stop, and it'd be on the road on Devonshire, probably at that intersection. I'm not sure, is that Devonshire and 33rd right there that goes between the apartment complexes?
Yeah.
And depending which way the bus is coming, it would be determined, but it'd probably be like that intersection is what we're thinking. But once again, depending if we have 5 kids standing out there or 30 kids, we might have to shift it down a little bit one way or the other, but we're thinking ideally that would be where it is, because then the parents could potentially pull into the parking lot where teachers used to park for the elementary school, and then the kids could walk to that stop, right? And like I said, it's more bus stops, picks up whoever's there, and then goes the rest of the way. So we don't want to add significant amount of time for the other students that are already riding, right? It's just to be a quick, we're here, open the door, students that are supposed to get on, and then continue on to the elementary school. That's what we currently envision as an opportunity.
Yeah, and
Grammarly helps you work more.
As I understand it, I don't know what that was, to be honest with you. It sounded like somebody's car radio.
Yeah.
So as I'm hearing this would be the shortest amount, like the shortest length of time that anybody coming from the Western would be on a bus, correct? Like it's like you're the last one to get picked up and you're the first one to get dropped off.
Correct. And so we would envision as the people that would maybe be potentially at the beginning of the route getting picked up in the morning might have that longer run. Then the families would have the option to go and sit and wait for the bus there at the school and be the last ones picked up. So they're not on the bus as long. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Mike, it really doesn't take away from the regular route, in my understanding. It wouldn't be, all right, you chose to do the community bus stop, so now the buses wouldn't run through those neighborhoods. It's still going to be a regular run, just an added bus stop.
Correct.
Okay.
And then depending on demand, it might be 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the buses that would have to stop, right?
But they still have to do that route.
They would still do the route, and that would just be the last stop that gets picked up before they go to the elementary school.
So we're not looking at, all right, this neighborhood all chose to be the community spot, and we're not going to run that anymore. Like, we still continue the route.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we'd still continue the route. Now it's possible that there'd be a bus stop that there might have been 2 kids at that chose to be at the other stop. So then
Right.
the bus wouldn't need to stop, but they'd still run the route.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they would continue on.
Okay, my concern was now we eliminate blocks or spotted blocks, and folks are here and not there. But just in my mind, that I understand, it's continue the route. and you choose to get on at home or the last stop as the community stop, and then off you go. Okay,
Right, yep.
hey, thanks, Mike.
No
Not-
problem.
Mike, I think it's a good idea to poll the community and see what they like and come back with a proposal to the board. If there's interest in the community, enough people there. I mean, even if there've been only 4 or 5 students, that's all we have is some bus stops. So I don't see the harm in that and see what we get back.
Okay, sounds good.
And I have a question to follow up on Mary's. So, but if I'm understanding it correctly, you could potentially eliminate bus stops. Like if both of my kids were in elementary school and we were the only ones at the bus stop and decided not to, we wanted to do the express bus, and that would no longer be a stop, and you could reroute the bus around my bus stop if there was nobody else involved, correct?
I mean, yeah, if we move your bus stop and we say that you no longer, there's no students ever at that bus stop anymore, assigned to that bus stop, we frequently adjust routes when
Right.
routes change, right? So, I mean, that could potentially happen, but we would not envision that major portions of the routes would no longer exist unless the demand is really just that high.
Yeah.
But right now, we don't really know what the demand would be, which would also be problematic for the express buses. I mean, how would we create the routes if we don't know where people are? So it sounds like there's an interest in getting more information and having us looking into it. So yeah, we can definitely do that and find out what the concerns would be for the families involved, how many people would be interested, and if that is the best location for it, or how can we coordinate that a little bit better. So
Mike, here's a.
And I guess if you can figure out how much time is really going to be saved on that bus, right? And how much time you think that the students would have to spend time on the bus, and how early would they actually get to that stop on the way home? I think it's the late home arrival that probably bugs parents the most.
yeah, I mean, we can give estimates based off of what we're experiencing right now, as far as what time that last stop would have to be to pick them up in the morning, and estimated what time they get to the first stop in the afternoon. And then they would be able to tell, hey, I'd get home at 4 o'clock, but now I'm getting home at 4:30. Okay, that's a benefit to me, or no, it's not, right? So and once again, it'd be estimates dependent on, how many people are involved. I mean, we don't expect it to significantly alter the routes, like I say, but we can give estimates based on this year's, and next year's ridership will likely be higher as we continue to transition out of COVID. So we go based on the information we know now, but it's not going to be an exact science, but hopefully we can be pretty close.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll help. Like
Yep.
you can see how it would be a problem.
Hey, Mike, here's a thought, and this you might have a reason why this wouldn't be a possibility. But if there is a large demand, like in doing the survey, instead of just having one, like the last stop, all buses going through the last stop at that intersection by what is it, Devonshire and 33rd, like you said. But if you say we're looking at 2 or 3 buses and 2 or 3 routes, could you consider using the last stop of each of those routes to diffuse the weight on just that one place? Do you understand what I'm saying there? So you wouldn't have, instead of having 20 or 25 students at one bus stop, now all of a sudden it would be 5 and 10 and 10 versus being all heavy weighted at one location. Do you understand what I'm saying there?
Yeah. So what we have is a TransFinder software that Mark Donnelly uses to coordinate routes. So he'll put in, okay, here's the students, here's where they live, or here's the bus stop that we're assigning them to. And then that software helps them map the routes and load the buses and everything and calculate things out for them. And so once again, depending on the demand, we may say, hey, instead of having 20 kids meet right there at the elementary school, maybe there's another 1 or 2 locations at the end of the routes that are naturally there. And see what I say. The one thing I'm concerned about or trying to be cognizant of is if it's in a very heavily populated residential neighborhood and they might not want 20 cars sitting out there, we would want to try to split that up. And I think that's kind of where you're going too, right? So you don't have really large, heavy bus stops.
Exactly.
So yeah, once again, depending on the demand, he can pop the numbers and say, okay, if we have these number of students at this stop, can we coordinate it so that there's maybe not all the same location, but 4 different final stops that pick up students and see if we can group them that way. But we just want to make sure that we're not, upsetting the residents in a neighborhood where we might have a large influx as well. So we're trying to think of all the different options to make it feasible, but also least disruptive as well. So thank you for that input though.
How far west do our buses go? Like what's the farthest western outreaches of the bus runs? The
mean, I think
general area,
I
is
think
it
some
out
of
near the hospital or beyond the hospital?
yeah, I think some of the longer runs are the ones that go up like Lehigh Parkway,
Mhm.
back in there. I don't, I mean, I don't run the routes myself, but I know that some of those could be a little bit longer, some of the farther reaches, but I mean, I'm sure there's some that are probably a little bit longer than that. But I mean, working with Mark and Nelly, he'll be able to see, okay, where's like the furthest reach or who's got the earliest pickup time in that and try to address that.
Yeah,
live
I
in
don't
the
know if that would,
Parkway.
I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, I live in the Parkway and there's lots of township to the west of me, like across Cedar Crest Boulevard, there's
Emmaus.
pockets of family that lives out there. Yep, like the very top corner of Emmaus.
I guess I was gonna ask, based on what, you just said, Sarah, is there a possibility that we could possibly have an express, like if there are enough kids out there to have an express from that area and not necessarily even stop at the middle school or the elementary school area?
I mean, I think the elementary school where it's placed is accessible to those people, especially who live on the other side of Cedar Crest Boulevard. I just don't know where we would do it because it's, completely residential. Like, I just don't know where we would put it if it weren't at the elementary school. Like, we'd really have to work that out.
Even a possibility of the kids walking, with their parents, is that out of the question in that area? No sidewalks or,
There's no sidewalks.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and George, I think that kind of piggybacks a little bit off of what Joe was saying, depending on where these kids that want to utilize this potential service, where they're coming from. We might be able to say, hey, the bus that normally goes to that area, the last stop is here. Would it be able to accommodate additional students showing up there or potentially shifting that stop a little bit? So it's really hard to gauge exactly where we might have some of those other alternative stops without really knowing where the demand is right now. But I think it's things to all consider.
Mhm.
And I'll echo what Sarah said, that I think we just need to be super clear on the survey so that you get the information you need going forward in terms of people making the choices and what the options are. So good luck with wording all that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
What's the deadline for us to be able to, for you to be able to plan all of this? What are we talking in terms of when you need approval?
Well, right now it's just, we just need to find out what the interest level is. So Mark has some time to really plan that out, because as we get into the beginning of August, he's got to be hardcore into developing these routes. But if we get this information over the next couple of weeks, maybe by the end of June, then through July, he can start planning. Even if the board doesn't approve it yet, say, how could we do it? I mean, he'll know what his typical runs would look like, but how would he need to alter them to potentially accommodate something like this? And then I would envision that if we were to do something like this, probably just run it by the board in August at the August operations committee meeting. If we find a good solution that can work, that we can present to you, and then just, ask for the board's approval at that point. I'm not sure if it would need an official board motion. It's just adding a bus stop, but if we determined it needed a board motion, we could add it to the August agenda. But I mean, I think by the August operations committee meeting, we could bring a proposal if there is one, and then you can let us know if we should proceed working that way or not. And then we can inform the public which way we're able to go with that.
Mike, in theory, you might not even need to add a bus stop per se if you just use the current last bus stop, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so I think this is a very creative option, and I agree with moving forward with it and exploring it, because I mean it's budget neutral and it's giving the least possible amount of bus time for kids. I think it's definitely worth exploring.
Excellent.
Okay, any other questions for Mike? Okay, thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other items from the board that need discussing or any questions? Okay, seeing none, I do. I guess first of all, I want to just refer to the election, and sorry to see that Mary, David, and myself are going to be going. Those are the definites that won't be on the ballot in November. And at the same time, we do have two definites, and that being Chris Fries and Laura McKelvey. I want to congratulate them, and I wish them the best in the future on the board, and I'm sure they'll be an asset also. So I just wanted to bring that up. Okay, that takes us to citizen comments. Do we have any, Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, at this time, it looks like we have Patty Mclean, followed by Elizabeth Kramer and Steve Nadal.
Okay,
Let me get Miss McLean access just 1 second. All right, Miss McLean, you should be available now.
Hi, good evening. I'm Patty McLean and my address is 1019 Wellington Terrace. My comment tonight is regarding the agenda item related to the community bus stop. I feel strongly that there should be some sort of community or express bus route, and I'm pleased to see that the board agrees with this. I think this will significantly shorten the amount of time that many elementary students spend on the bus each day. The long bus ride has in part played a role in why my family has enrolled our children in a charter school. I live near Lindbergh Park, and my daughter's bus ride to the charter school she has attended this past year is less than 10 minutes, rather than the approximately 40 minutes to Salisbury Elementary School. When I drive her to or from school myself, I know that the whole ordeal will take me about 15 minutes and I'll be back home. Neighbors and friends who use the car line at SES spend more like 50 minutes, 50, to complete the round trip. And some families do that twice each day. I think it's important for me to candidly share with you that this is really significant in family life and has driven families like mine to choose to attend a charter school. And going forward, I would anticipate it's a factor for other families considering charter schools or private schools that are closer and more convenient and with much shorter bus rides than sending young kids to SES on the bus. So if there are steps you can take, like what you're pursuing tonight, to brainstorm creative solutions to shorten that bus ride, I strongly urge you to do so. I think it's just doing the right thing for kids and doing the right thing for families. But beyond all that, it will also have financial payoffs in the long term in terms of keeping families in district schools. On another separate note, I must also say that I am concerned to hear the proposal tonight to use the ESSER funds for salaries and benefits of existing teachers. Just because it's allowable doesn't mean that it's smart. And I'm really fearful that we'll be in a really difficult financial spot again in the future if we're using one-time funds for salaries and benefits of current special education teachers. So I would like to see that more closely examined moving forward. Thank you for your time. Good night.
All right, we have Elizabeth Kramer and Stephen Nadal and Ms. Kramer, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. My name is Beth Kramer. I live at 2932 Greenbrier Lane, and next year I'll have 2 elementary kids riding the bus. My concern is also the length of the bus ride, and I hope the suggestion that was put forward about an additional bus stop will actually shorten the length of the ride. I think this is a really solvable problem, whether we use an express bus or an optional bus stop, or even consolidate the bus stops on each route. And I really hope that it doesn't get pushed aside and ignored, because there are a lot of other members of the community that feel the same way that I do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Mr. Gatanis, there is nobody else at this time signed up to speak.
okay, thank you. Okay, our next meeting will be August 4th. And I'm sure the same subject with the buses will be discussed then too, I would assume, Mike, right?
Yes, that would be the plan.
Okay, all right, thank you. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. And thanks to the public.
All right, thank you, everybody. That's the conclusion of our operations meeting. We're gonna roll into our curriculum meeting. Does the board need 5 minutes?
I do.
Please.
Okay, so let's take 5 minutes. It's 7:50 and we will start that meeting at 7:55.
Hey, Lynn, do you want to stop recording and then hit re-record at the beginning of the next meeting so you can separate out the meetings? I don't know, it's just a suggestion.
Yeah, we could,
You don't have to. I didn't know if you wanted to keep it separate.
we'll stop it so that we say it again if there's any people who join later.